It's that time you've all been waiting for, my big subscriber special. This time I'll be talking about all 14 Thomas and Friends movies. Thomas is mostly known as a TV show, however it's had quite a number of films. Only one theatrical, but 13 of these are DVD releases. Today I'll be reviewing and ranking them all. Hope you guys enjoy. So we start our journey with Thomas and the Magic Railroad. And honestly, what can I say about this movie that hasn't already been said millions and millions of times at this point? It is of a very questionable quality and brought the franchise in a very confusing direction. A diesel comes to the island to cause trouble for the steam engines named Diesel 10. Mr. Conductor comes over there for a visit, but oh no, he runs out of magic because, well, he was being really sloppy with it, and thus needs to find the magic engine to restore his powers. Not to mention, there's another human character named Lily who's also involved in this story. Oh yeah, Thomas is here too. Probably should have mentioned that. This whole movie is just... why was this the direction to bring a Thomas movie into, is what this screams. Describing how I feel about this movie is kind of hard, because I have a kind of love-hate relationship with it. Like, I don't really like most of the human characters. Well, the conductors are fine. I'm specifically talking about Lily, Patch, and Burnett Stone. They aren't really my thing. I question the Magic Edition. I just don't think that was a good fit for this franchise. And also the lack of, well, Thomas characters in this Thomas movie is the thing I bring the most question to. But then there's things I really like. The score is incredible, the visuals are very engaging, and anytime the engines are on screen, it is a slam dunk. Another thing I feel like I should highlight is this is the introduction of a semi-mainstay character, in these movies at least, Diesel 10. And in this film, he's easily the best part of the movie. He is such a blast anytime he comes on screen, and he just adds a lot of fun to what is a pretty unremarkable story. It's no shocker to see why Diesel 10 became such a recurring character after this film. It's just kind of funny they didn't really use him much in the TV show. There's a lot to like and dislike about this movie is how I feel about it. And my opinion on it is it's got a lot of good elements, and I appreciate it a lot from a filmmaking standpoint, but overall, the movie doesn't end up appealing to me as much as the initial TV show did, and I find it kind of underwhelming for the only theatrical Thomas movie we've ever gotten at this moment in time. Also, before I end this segment, I should probably mention the work print. It's not good. It's 10 times less interesting. Thomas characters surprisingly appear even less in it, and P.T. Boomer's not that great of a character. Don't have much more to say other than, nah, not for me. And thus, Magic Railroad is so far the best and worst movie in this ranking so far, because it's the only one we've talked about. Alright, let's jump into Calling All Engines. To celebrate 60 years of the Railway series back in 2005, Hit Entertainment commissioned the production of a Thomas hour-long movie, and this is the result. Also, I know I'm famously known for hating on this movie, at least I think I am, but to be honest with you, my feelings towards it have subdued a bit. That doesn't mean it's good though. So, what's the story of the film? Topham is building a new airport to get more visitors to the island of Sodor. During this time, the steam engines and the diesel engines are having a feud and can't get along. But they'll soon have to realize they need to put aside their differences and work together to get the airport done. So in general, that's the basic setup. Oh yeah, also Diesel 10 is in this movie. He's on all the promotions and the covers of the DVD for both regions, but he's barely in it. He makes up, like, I want to say 3 minutes of the whole film, and he only has, like, 4 lines in the whole movie. I don't get what the point of him being in here is. Well, besides the marketing. And as for this being the second movie we're talking about, well, I'll say this, it really doesn't feel like a movie. If anything, this just feels like an hour-long Season 8 episode. If anything, I could have seen this being like a two-parter to start up Season 9 if they were doing two-parters. I really think this one is just needlessly extended in many areas, specifically with the usage of learning segments and music videos. Yeah, I'm not making any groundbreaking statements there, but It needs to be stated, this movie takes forever because of these things, and it really drags the pacing down. Because when you take those away, the movie definitely flows a bit better, and honestly, there's a lot to like in this one. I think the steam and diesel engine conflict is handled way better than it usually is in the series at this point in time. If anything, I like that it presents that these steam engines can be very nasty, and the diesel engines are pretty good. It's a yin and yang kind of thing. There isn't an all or one kind of thing. And the message of putting aside your differences and working together is a great one for this franchise to do. It's also nice just to see some old props again. We see Daisy, Lady, Derek. It's kind of fun to spot them all. Also, the production in the movie is pretty good. Sure, it still has the same Season 8 look, but they do try to do some cool things, like that suspension bridge scene. The weather looks pretty nice here. Like, it's a pretty solid movie from a production standpoint. And though I did say the music videos were kind of pointless, I won't lie and say they all are pretty catchy even in spite of that. Yeah, making this movie sound really good in many areas when you take those segments out. Well, I will still say those segments do damper the experience because they are required during the movie. Even if you watch like an edited out version of the film, I don't know what it is, but I still think this movie kind of drags a bit. Like, it is from the hit entertainment era, and the pacing of it really shows, because a lot of those later model episodes are really slow, and this just feels as slow as watching your average Season 8 episode, and I think that really bogs down the watching experience. I'll say, if this was like a 2-part episode that premiered Season 9, I think this could have been a pretty solid way to open the season. However, that's not what it is. We have an hour-long special that is bogged down by learning segments, music videos that reiterate a lot of the same stuff, and a way too slow of a pace for my liking for me to call this a truly good film. But I'll say I've warmed up a bit on it and would call it a pretty poor, but it tried its best film. Going under Magic Railroad, it just drags a little more than that one. Also, this scene here with the owl. This was the first time the public ever saw any of Jack in the Pack. Let that sink in. The Great Discovery. Finally, we have a good model Thomas movie. Thomas discovers an old abandoned town and tries to restore it for Sodor Day. A new engine named Stanley arrives to the island and makes Thomas feel like he's unimportant and unspecial, but the two find common ground at the end. Before this rewatch, I remember thinking Great Discovery had a lot of good ideas and was pretty charming, but overall had a lot of lackluster elements about it, so I was ready to review the special and be like that. But after this rewatch, okay, no, this movie is actually really good. You guys are right. Especially Express Bean 64, who made an amazing video talking about Great Discovery. Go watch that. But now it's time to talk about why Great Discovery is, like, awesome and easily the best model era Thomas film. But then again, with the competition, it's not a hard one to win. I think out of the gate, the first thing that sticks out to me is that this is a Thomas production that feels like a movie. Magic Railroad felt like a movie, but not a Thomas production, and Calling All Engines felt like a Thomas production, but not a movie. Like, this feels like it has the tone of a traditional Thomas story, but it's elevated for a more theatrical film. Well, obviously not theatrical, but bigger than the TV show, but smaller than a mainstream movie, let's say. Thomas finding a town that's abandoned for years just feels so at home in this franchise, and it world builds in a really fun way. The songs are much better integrated. I like the fact that we get to see a lot of characters throughout the franchise pop up to this point in the timeline. And the pacing is finally on point. Like, this movie doesn't feel too stretched out in many areas. I'd say there's some scenes that could go on a little long, but that's kind of nitpicking, and they really don't take away from the movie. I also love Thomas's story in this film. He finds this old abandoned town and wants to make it a special thing for Sodor Day, but he gets a bit cocky and full of himself. And when the new engine Stanley arrives onto the island as Sodor, he feels a bit emasculated because everybody's slowly starting to drift their attention away from him, even though he thinks he really deserves it. He didn't intend to do anything really bad, but there's a lot of people who have a lot of irrational thinking out there, And to him throughout the movie, it makes a lot of sense for him to think, oh man, they maybe just don't value me as much as they used to. He sees that Stanley's heavily integrated himself into places he was, and maybe that honorable job wasn't the most important thing to him. It's impressive to me how Thomas still feels in line with his earlier model self than he does his later one here, because I could see this being a classic story. I also like for this movie that they were pretty reserved with when they would do grand stunts. Like, for example, we only have that major crash in the middle of the film with the tower and Stanley's trucks, and Thomas crossing that huge gap near the end of the movie. Again, these are pretty extreme action things, but they don't appear super often. It's not like the franchise is saying, hey, look, the whole series is magic now. It's the same Thomas, but a bit more theatrical, and I enjoyed these quite a bit. Though if I were to get into some things that don't fully work with me with this movie, I know this might be a L take, but I'm not big on Pierce Brosnan's narration. Now, I don't hate him, and he doesn't ruin the movie. I enjoy him fine enough, but I feel like I would have enjoyed this movie with Brandon or Angelus more. I don't know, a lot of the whispering Pierce Brosnan does really isn't for me. And I think while I like Stanley's role in the movie, as a character, he's fine, but he's far from one of my favorite characters introduced in these films. Maybe if the TV show did more with him, I wouldn't complain, but they never did, so. But I won't let those little things bother me, because overall, I think The Great Discovery is, well, great. It did all the things it needed to, and if they played their cards right, this could have been a perfect Thomas series finale. Makes me wonder how it would be like if this did end the show. Unfortunately, we still got like 11 movies left to go. But at the moment, Great Discovery is at the deserving #1 spot on the list. Let's see how long it keeps it. Hero over the Rails, the switch to CGI. Did Thomas have a graceful transition? Let's find out. Thomas finds an old Japanese engine named Hero that he wants to save and restore to his former glory. However, Spencer is getting in the way, but in the end, Thomas ends up saving Hero. So that's the basic rundown, but how well is this story told? Now, I want to make it clear, I do not hate this movie. I have a lot of issues with it, but I don't hate it. I'm just saying that right now because I'm going to be a little negative for a little bit. So let me just get into why. First off, I think the plot is really dumb for this film. It all hinges on Thomas finding this old abandoned Japanese engine, which I like, but what I don't like is that Hero's like, no, don't tell the Fat Controller. But it's like, Topham has saved so many scrapped and abandoned engines at this point. Why would Thomas not think he would do it this time around? And even more confusing, why is Spencer so concerned about it? I don't get why Spencer's the villain of this movie. He doesn't really have a reason to want to scrap Hero. He just does it because he feels like it that day, I guess. I don't know. In general, Spencer doesn't really act like himself, not even just in the villain sense, but he's also going around pulling trucks and acting so braggy about it, but like, this is work Spencer would never want to be caught dead doing otherwise, so I don't know why he's so proud of pulling freight all the time. He's literally never seen pulling coaches once all movie. With that as well, there's also other questionable things, like why is Topham so lenient when Thomas loses Percy's mail cars? He really is like, it's fine, just look for him tomorrow, like 3 different times in the whole movie. The narrator rambles for way too long, like this isn't a model production anymore, the characters can talk. Why is he talking over scenes that the characters could just do themselves? And also, what's with all the greenery? I get this is the first CGI installment, but man, it's just green areas over green areas and green areas all movie. I don't know, just a little more visual appeal would be much better for this. But yeah, these are just some things I noticed on the recent rewatch where I was just like, why? What? Come on. But there are things I do quite like about this film. I think every major character is characterized well for the first time. The UK voice dub is really good for this movie. I don't mind them too much, honestly, here. And the new characters, Hero and Victor, have a lot of charm to them, and they're quite entertaining parts of the cast that fit in super well. And in general, I think the CGI is actually used pretty well in this film. I think that this one really showed why a special in this visual style works in general. Like, there's a lot of really good elements to this one that really help it, but there's also a lot of elements that really drag it down, if you know what I mean. So that makes this one kind of hard, because when it's at its best, it's pretty good. When it's at its worst, it's pretty underwhelming. So in general, I'll say Hero of the Rails is okay, but I wouldn't call it one of the best Thomas movies, if you know what I mean. I feel like if this one ironed out its plot more, maybe replace Spencer with a Diesel, just so it makes a little more sense why you'd want it to be scrapped, and say, I don't know, Topham went on a holiday so they can't really contact him to help with the restoration of Hero. Little things like that, I think really would have made this one of the greatest Thomas films, because the outline is there, there's a lot of blueprints there, but it's kind of bogged out a lot by its questionable writing. But still, I don't think it's awful. It just could have been better. Oh boy, we're finally here. Misty Island Rescue. After losing Joby Wood that's needed to build the new search and rescue center, Thomas offers to go to the mainland to retrieve some. However, he ends up being stumbled onto an island with 3 rednecks and now needs to find his way back to Sodor. What can I say about this movie that hasn't already been said? It is a very brain-dead film. A lot of the new characters are just plain annoying. Thomas is made unlikable in this film. And there's also that questionable scene with him and Diesel. You know. So what else do I have to say about this movie that no one else has said? Well, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to point out some pretty cool things about this film that I think that some fans neglect. Now, I am not saying Misty Island Rescue is a good movie. It is a really bad film. But I'm trying to do something a little new here, and there's a lot of things I grew to appreciate on this latest rewatch. For instance, I like the setting of Misty Island from a visual standpoint. Nitrogen did a really good job with the render. The score for this special really slaps. I'm surprised I don't hear it praised often enough. Like, I genuinely think they did a really good job on this score. And I will say, I honestly think the idea for Misty Island Rescue is actually a really good one, of getting Thomas alone. I think where they falter a lot, though, is how it's done, obviously. Like, I don't mind Thomas being a bit of an egotist, but they don't really give him an arc. They just kind of make him, he's always right kind of guy, but then, oh no, he's wrong, but they don't really build up to any kind of story with that. There's also his questionable line towards Diesel, which never gets brought up again. Like, what was the point? To me, what should have happened is that Thomas is just given the job of pulling the Joby Wood, and then maybe people start saying how cool he is, and it inflates his ego, and then maybe something happens where Diesel gets aggressive about it, do it like a classic style thing, and that's what prompts him to take the Joby Wood, and then there could be a whole arc about Thomas being built up as this awesome dude, but really needing to be knocked down. Something like that would easily improve this movie, but nah, Thomas is just a prick for no reason. The movie is also consistently inconsistent with itself. Like, none of the engines have brake vans. The amount of Joby Wood fluctuates a lot. Like, there's loads of them on the boat, but then there's only 9 apparently afterwards. Topham sends engines in both the tunnel and on boat to Misty Islands. Like, why not just send them through the tunnels? Everybody makes stupid decisions in this movie. Thomas is not alone in this one. Honestly, the only characters who don't are the logging locos, but they're the logging locos. Who likes them? The movie quickly becomes mental gymnastics on how basic things work, like the underwater tunnel that surrounds Misty Islands. What? The one word I can't use to describe this movie, however? Boring. It's a very dumb movie. It's a very badly made movie. It's a very confusing movie. But it is literally never boring. And to me, that is why this is not the worst Thomas film. It's at least always interesting. So to me, and I know not everyone's gonna agree, but Misty Island Rescue was an interesting experiment that I am glad they at least tried out. But at the end of the day, really didn't work and had a lot of issues that went for it. Is it the worst movie of the series so far? Yeah, probably. but is it a movie I think is unbearable to watch? I think that's a bit too extreme. Oh yeah, there's this post-credit scene with Diesel 10, almost forgot to mention it. Wonder if that's going to be important for the next film. Percy feels like he's undervalued by Thomas because Thomas has been spending more time with two new characters, Belle and Flynn, so hangs out with the Diesels and tries to become their hero, but needs to realize that Thomas is his true friend. This movie is junk. I have no other ways to put it. This is way worse than Misty Island Rescue, in my opinion. Hang on, here are the few things I do like before we get to complaining. I think Diesel 10, up until the end, is characterized fine here. I don't mind the manipulative version, even if I think this would have just worked better with normal Diesel. It's cool that Percy gets the lead role, and there's a few decent music tracks in this one, but yeah, that's kind of it. Everything else about this movie is just so empty. Well, I would say it like this. Misty Island Rescue is an hour of chaos. Day of the Diesels is an hour of boredom. This whole movie is just Percy going here, Percy going there, and just like, it feels like nothing's really happening in the whole movie. How do you make a film that's even more uninteresting than Calling All Engines? That's just so impressive to me. On that subject as well, it also does the steamy versus diesel conflict that we all hear so often at this point, and this is probably the worst it's ever been. Thomas is characterized very similar to the last movie and how he portrayed Diesels there. He has an almost similar scene in this one as well, where he's talking about them to Belle. But unlike Calling All Engines, they're all treated like a unit. Every diesel is bad and every steam engine is good. Even though Thomas and Percy are the only major steam engines in this film, and the two are completely insufferable in this movie. Percy just predominantly whines all the time because he wants to be Thomas's only friend, but like, bro, Thomas can have more than one friend. Thomas isn't out of the clear either, though, because he's ignoring Percy in times he clearly could talk to him. You just don't want either character to win. Honestly, I'm just rooting for Diesel 10. At least until the end, where when Diesel 10 actually gets what he wants, Topham scolds him and he's worried? This is what you wanted, why are you upset? What's even the point of the Diesel Works anyways? It's in bad repair, everything is so rotten. And what's weirder is in episodes before Day of the Diesels, we saw Diesels get fixed at the Steamworks, so what's the point in this second one? Especially considering it doesn't seem like Topham wants to keep it running. Does he just not check on it? Is that how it got in such disrepair? Man, I see why Diesel 10 thinks he doesn't love him. There really isn't much else I can say about this movie without coming off as just annoyed, because that's all Day of the Diesels does, and in my opinion, this is the worst Thomas movie because it does nothing. Say whatever you will about Misty Island Rescue again, I'm not defending that movie, but at least it was doing something the whole hour. This is just like a cure for insomnia at this point with how boring it is. This is without a doubt going at the bottom of the ranking so far. It will be impressive if any movie is worse than Day of the Diesels. Here we are at Blue Mountain Mystery. Finally, a thing that Andrew Brenner had some involvement with. And, unsurprisingly, it's really good. After having to take over work from Paxton at the Blue Mountain Quarry, Thomas finds a green engine named Luke who has done something really bad, and he tries to get to the bottom of what he has done and solve everything. It's a very simple plot, but it works really, really well. I think it helps the fact that Thomas and Luke's bond feels really genuine in this film compared to some of the other friends that he makes in these movies. Luke's trauma honestly makes a lot of sense here. He believes he killed a man. You know, that's obviously not what actually happened, but from his perspective, it makes a lot more sense as to why he would be afraid. Also, the narrow gauge engines. We get a movie that's mostly about them, and they're all pretty well characterized here. It's so nice to see them actually used for once in the CGI era, considering it never happens again after this film. It's also cool to see a movie where we're mostly distant from all the major cast members, except Thomas, of course. All the mains just share one scene later on where they talk about the worst things they have done, but it's a really impactful scene about them talking about bad things from previous episodes, which is really cool to see redone in CGI for the first time. Thomas also just plays a really interesting role here compared to usual. He's more of an observer of what's going on and the medium as to how to solve things in the movie, as opposed to just being the kind of main character who goes through his own little arc here. He's more the assistant for the other characters to go through their arc, and it's a really unique portrayal of how this could be done. They also finally do something with Paxton this time, presenting him as more of the naive but optimistic character we become more familiar with during the Brenner era. Compare that to last movie where he just kind of exists in that film, you know. And it was nice of them to pair him up with Diesel too, showing a strong conflict between them. It's like a yin and yang kind of thing. Though they are of the same class, they don't act the same at all. Not to mention, we also have Victor's role in the movie, which, my god, they did a really cool thing with Victor here. They actually expanded on him. They don't normally do this in the CGI era, but it was really nice of them to do something like this. His history gets a lot of spotlight, where he comes from, them establishing he's from a different country, and learning to speak English. They really didn't have to use Victor. They could have just made a new character, but they decided to beef up an older existing character as opposed to just making a new character they could easily market for toys. And with my statement I said earlier, I feel like I'm really giving Brenner a lot of credit here, but I don't want to diss on Sharon Miller's chops, where I have complained a lot about her work throughout my channel's lifetime. I can't lie and say she probably did do a good job at least presenting a lot of these ideas. Maybe it was just she needed them filtered through someone else to do it. Makes me wonder how some of the other movies would have gone if something like this happened. Also, that ending scene people always complain about. I don't get why people are so mad. It makes sense. Skarloey's trust was betrayed by Thomas. It makes sense for him to get mad about it. I'll agree the climax is a little silly, but so are all the ones in every other Thomas movie. Honestly, there's just really nothing that's like actively ruining this movie. That post-credit scene's a little dumb, but I don't really have much wrong with this film, and I think it's a really tight Thomas movie that tells a compelling story. This is easily the best movie on the list so far, bar none. I'm very glad to see these are starting to really improve now. Thomas, Percy, and James help the Earl of Sodor rebuild Ulfstead Castle. In the meantime, there's a plot about Spencer and Gordon racing, and one about Stephen trying to find a job, but that's besides the point. I will say something about this film is that it feels less like a movie and more like 4-episode plots fused together. But at least they're all plots I actually like. I do think King of the Railway is quite an enjoyable film. This one is mostly carried by the charm of it being the first of the Brenner era, and it's kind of fun to see everything they tried fixing after the years of the show's quality declining hard. Something else I also like about this movie is I think it's got a good amount of charming character dialogue. Thomas, Percy, James have really fun banter throughout this film. I even like the scenes with Gordon and Spencer because they're just such an entertaining duo. This movie also introduced the Stevenson's rocket, or Steven. And I'm gonna say this, Steven's probably my favorite CGI character. He's just such a fun character, and I really like his plot about him trying to find jobs and being sad about how much the world has changed around him. Not to also mention the Earl of Sodor, who's just as fun of a character, honestly. He's just got such an energy and charm to him, I like him quite a bit. Overall, The King of the Railway is a pretty good movie. I think it was a fun way to start the Renaissance. They even brought Jack back for a quick appearance. And it all is a pretty good, tight film. Is it the best Thomas movie? Not really. You can kind of tell with this segment being much shorter, I didn't have as much to say about it. But this was a very important Thomas movie. It got Thomas out of the gutter it had been in for so long. It introduced some fun mainstays like Stephen and the Earl. And it's just very charming in my honest opinion. So while it isn't the best Thomas movie, I'm glad it exists. It's fun to pop in every now and again. Not all these films have to be perfection, honestly I don't think any of them are. But if you just want a good time, King of the Railway is your guy. It's just reassuring to know sometimes that the Brenner era did start on a pretty good foot. Not the best foot, but a good one. Thomas sees a footprint that he's not sure what it belongs to. Percy later on starts seeing monsters, and James starts teasing him for being afraid. Hoping that Thomas would stick up for him, he doesn't, so decides to try to run away, but in realization that that's not what being brave is about, tries to conquer his fears on his own. This is a Thomas movie about the three main characters of the show, Thomas, James, and Percy. In my eyes, did a perfect job characterizing all three of them. It characterizes all three of them very well, and it does a lot to show the relationship between them specifically. We see Thomas and Percy's friendship, which kind of sours in the middle of the film, and we see the belittling dynamic between James and Percy here, which is one of the biggest highlights of the movie to me, as this is one of those unique times where one of the show's main characters gets to kind of play a villain role. And unlike Spencer and Hero of the Rails, I think it makes a little more sense here. At least they build up to the situation of him trying to make Percy afraid a lot more because he was being bullied by the other main characters, deservingly so. It's very fun to get a movie about our three big leads of the franchise. Granted, I'd definitely say out of the three, Percy has the biggest role in the film, thus marking his second film as main character, but Thomas and James still have more than enough to do for this to be their story as well. Not to mention the character Percy's most centric with this film, Gator. While I wish Gator was explained why he's on Sodor better, and his confusing disappearance after season 18, I really like the dude on it. And I love how he presents his theme of fear through his fear of heights in a similar way Percy is afraid of the monster of Sodor that doesn't exist. It really makes that goodbye at the end with Gator feel so much more emotional than it would otherwise. On top of that as well, it's nice that some of the other side characters get some prominent roles in here. Bill, Ben, Cranky, all get some prominent portions, like when Bill and Ben save Thomas from the landslide, and when Cranky immediately latches his hook to that boat to try to save Percy. Granted, Percy's not there, obviously, but still, the gesture was really nice, and the scene itself was really impactful. Honestly, there's so much great action in this movie in general, whether it be the landslides in the beginning and end of the film, or a Cranky scene. They're not too overdone either, so it makes it feel very natural when they do come up. The only real issue I have with the movie is the ending where it plays the la 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 let's be brave song, which is really annoying. But not only that, but it kind of kills the mood of that sweet finale. I know it wasn't the initial plan, but still, it really does sour the movie by the end term. But it is honestly far from a deal breaker to kill my enjoyment of this film. This movie really had something to say and did a lot with its major characters, and also how great it tied in with season 18. Go watch that video if you haven't already, wink wink. But yeah, what else is there to say about Tale of the Brave other than it is a tale worth looking at? This is without a doubt my favorite Thomas movie so far. Let's see how much longer it stays at number 1. What can I say about The Adventure Begins that hasn't been said multiple times already? It is truly a strong reimagining of Thomas's first days on the island of Sodor. It is an absolutely wonderful film for any Thomas fan, no matter how old you are. Out of the gate with how it's produced, you can tell this movie knew what it wanted to do and just went along with retelling the stories that Wilbur Audrey and Britt Allcroft had produced, and added its own unique spin to make it a worthwhile watch for those who had seen those stories multiple times over already. And it serves as a perfect introduction for younger fans who are new to the CGI stuff. This is also the only quote-unquote movie on the list that's only around 44 minutes, much shorter than usual. Almost all of these have to be an hour or longer long. But this is a case where being an hour just is not necessary. I'm very glad they knew this was only a 40-minute story and just stuck with it. Not only, though, does it just lovingly adapt those classic stories, but it adds a lot of new elements that feel right at home. Thomas meeting Annie and Clarabelle before he actually wins them was honestly a really amazing addition, and I think it's one of the best add-ons. The LBSC livery as well is another highlight. I think it was very smart of them to introduce Thomas in that form before he gets his true number 1. Not to mention them actually explaining why he's the number 1 engine, something that the Railway series or the Classic series never really did all that well. So I think honestly The Adventure Begins, for me at least, is at its best when it's adding a lot of these new elements. Now don't get me wrong, I love the way it adapts the Railway series and classic series text, but at the same time, I would say it just is a good job, not a phenomenal job, at adapting it. The best parts to me are like the newest editions. Though, if I had to complain a little, it's a complaint that I think most people have: Thomas and Henry's characterizations. Thomas is fun here, but he's a little too nice, and I think his arc is not as well earned. And Henry, well, it's CGI era Henry, and I'm not gonna lie, not the biggest fan of how he's portrayed throughout this run, so naturally, not a fan of Wuss Henry here. Every other character's fine, though. But even with all those character failures, it doesn't really affect my feelings towards the movie one bit. I still think The Adventure Begins is worth watching. Heck, it's free on YouTube, so if you haven't seen it already, somehow go do it. And for as amazing as The Adventure Begins is, I still think at the moment I like Tale of the Brave more. More just because I like the stories between Thomas, Percy, and James there than I do this retelling. But don't let that discourage you. This is still a second place in the ranking so far. I still love The Adventure Begins. 2015 was such a great year for Thomas, man. Well, we're here. Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. Now, it's considered the best movie by many. Do I agree with that? Yes. Yeah, I do. Sorry, guys. I'm extremely basic. After some mishaps throughout the day, Thomas is sent to work on the Harwick branch line. He then later stumbles upon an untrustworthy fellow named Sailor John, and the chase is on to see who can get the treasure. This is the Thomas movie to me that feels most like a movie. A lot of these other films just can feel like elongated episodes sometimes, or like an in-between between movies and, well, the TV show. Here, they full-on made this feel like a cinematic adventure, with the way it's shot, the way it's angled. Sure, I'll agree it's not the most, true to Thomas movie in the sense of it does go a little out there, but as I've said in a couple videos before, I don't mind them stretching this. Along with that, too, I don't think this is really an introduction to the Thomas franchise kind of movie. Magic Railroad's biggest fault was that it was a lot of people's first experience with the property. This expects you to be familiar with the property quite a bit, so doing this, I think, is fine. The plot also just gets going as well. Like, some of these movies can take a little while to start up, or sometimes just never get to that point. Lost Treasure just starts as soon as it starts, and it doesn't stop that pace until the movie is over. And I really like that about it. It doesn't waste time, there's no issues. Though, if I had to argue something, I can agree the movie goes a bit too fast, and maybe a few extra minutes could have benefited this one. This is like the first time I would ever say something like that. But it doesn't bother me, because what we have here is still very well made, and I like how compacted it is. But I think it's time to get to one of the biggest things people can argue over: Thomas's characterization in this movie. Some really like it, some really hate it. I've, of course, fallen into the camp of those who really like it. But I can get it. Thomas is definitely kind of a jerk in this film, and he's a bit full of himself. But I think that was supposed to be the point. Thomas has gotten to a point in his career where he's so comfy with how things are. He doesn't expect his life to change. He's gotten a little too comfy with his status quo. So I like them breaking out of this and him realizing, no, Topham can still get angry at him. Thomas can still make irrational decisions. I really like that. It never felt too bad for me because it's clear that this was a part of the narrative. Compare that to Misty Island, where he's just kind of a jerk for literally no reason in that movie, and there is no arc with it. Here, there's a clear arc, and it's set up from the beginning that this is what it's supposed to be like. Also, Topham's characterization gets way too much hate. From his perspective on all of these, it makes 100% sense why he would think Thomas is just making up excuses, or thinks he's just wrong. I have no issue with how Topham acts. If anything, it's so refreshing here, considering how laxed he is in the CGI era normally. We also have our antagonist, Sailor John, who is awesome. He throws dynamite at Thomas. He's got this eerie tone to him every time he's on screen. And also how much he abuses Skiff, who looks like the dumbest character in the world, but I really like his arc of needing to stand up for himself a lot in this film. But I will say, for as much as I'm singing this film's praises, it's not perfect. I honestly think Ryan is a really good character, especially when he's in the TV show. But here in this movie, I think he's just okay. He doesn't take anything away from this movie, but he doesn't really need to be here. Also, that Henry subplot, I don't get what it was doing in this movie at all. I think it's kind of pointless. It's barely in the movie, so it doesn't like ruin it or anything, but it is something that I feel like could have been dedicated time to something else. But really, that's kind of all I have in terms of issues, and they're such minor things, they don't really harm the movie for me. Overall, this just felt like a big love letter for fans, seeing characters like Donald and Douglas return, the small railway engines appear, and even relating it to their lore. Honestly, how could you go wrong with Lost Treasure? This is easily going at number 1. I absolutely love this film. Can't get enough of it. Thomas wants to go to the Great Railway Show. Oh yeah, there's also a subplot about Gordon and his brother that's pretty cool, but it's not focused on that much. Oh, and there's also a not as interesting Diesel subplot that also isn't focused on that much. Okay, I know I'm sounding like I hate this movie. I don't. It's got a lot of problems. I think the biggest issue this movie has, just to say it out of the way, is the pacing. It takes way too long to get to the Great Railway Show. And then when we do finally get to it, it feels like it just kind of ends. It's not like I want to say it just stops, but what happens there is so fun that you want to see more of it, but we only have like 15 minutes to do all the cool stuff. But we spend so much time seeing Thomas mope around, being like, oh, he's not as good as he should be. This isn't really a character trait Thomas normally has. Usually he's pretty confident and assured of who he is. The only time he really acted like that is in seasons 8 through 11. So I don't really know why this movie brought it back for this one. But to be honest, watching this film, it really doesn't feel like they want to focus on Thomas. It feels more like they have to. A lot of the really cool stuff in this film happens with Gordon and his brother the Flying Scotsman, which they introduced properly in the TV show for the first time. And he's awesome here. I love their dynamic, it's a lot of fun, but I want more of that dynamic, but we can't get it here. They have to spend all this time seeing mopey-dopey Thomas be upset, but that's not really all that cool. Oh, and not to mention that Diesel subplot, which just kind of pops up sometimes, and it's really easy to forget the movie even has it, and they don't really pay it off very well. It just starts happening, and then it starts happening. You know, there isn't as much of a setup and payoff here, so I question what's the point. But I will say, when the movie is actually feeling a little focused is when it gets pretty good. You got all the songs, which are really catchy, and I enjoyed those a lot. And like I said before about Gordon and Flying Scotsman, that's awesome. In fact, anything with Gordon is really cool. I especially love that race near the end. And all the stuff at the Great Railway Show is really fun. Like, the movie starts and, for the most part, ends really well, but it just makes me wish the movie was about Gordon, and I don't really know why it's not. But if I had to take a few guesses, maybe it's because the movie wouldn't be as profitable that way. I mean, you can put Thomas's face on everything. If in general, that also describes a lot of this movie, too. Feels like a big marketing machine. You see all the new foreign engines, they all have their toys, that Diesel 3-pack, and I guess the most notorious of them all, Thomas jumping over the bridge. But I do want to make this clear. This was not a hard movie to sit through at all. This isn't as boring as, say, Day of the Diesels, or as brain dead as Misty Island, but at the same time, it just screams a lot of missed potential. But it is a fine, solid movie. It's fine to put on every now and again. A lot of the really good elements shine through. It's just kind of lackluster, and it just leaves me wanting more of what's really good. To me, The Great Race is the most could be a lot better movie, but also could have been a lot worse movie. And I will say, I think this movie is at least worth watching once, but I don't know about more than that. Journey Beyond Sodor is without a doubt the movie in this series that my opinion on can change the most. So what I say here could change the next time I have to bring up this movie. But at the moment, honestly kind of enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong, it ain't the best Thomas movie, but I kinda had some fun. So the plot is, Thomas brings some trucks to the mainland and gets kidnapped by two diesels who work at a smelter's yard, and he needs to make his way back home, but then James comes in and he has to save him. Unlike the last movie, I really will say Journey Beyond did a good job getting going. It didn't take forever for Thomas to get off the mainland. It only took a few minutes and then bam, he's already on the mainland, and they do a lot more with him on the mainland than they did with him at the Great Railway Show. The vision for this one definitely seems a lot less compromised than the previous movie, and in general, this movie feels a lot less like a toy commercial than the last one. Because when it comes to the writing and the overall story, I think it's pretty good. But where my opinion on it usually can sway is how much I end up tolerating the more goofier aspects, i.e. the engines bobbing their bodies around, the more cartoony physics like this scene right here, and just other scenes like this that make me be like, why is this a Thomas movie? I know this movie basically got sandwiched in between the previous era and the following era, and it really doesn't feel like it fits with being a Wubba production or a Brenner era production. Not to mention some of the side characters are a bit hit or miss. I like Hurricane and Frankie quite a bit. I think they're good antagonists until the end, but we'll get to that. The experimental engines, though, I don't mind, but I think they could have done more in the plot, or hey, maybe you could have used the extra 10 minutes on something that wasn't Beresford. This movie is slightly longer, and the only reason is because of Beresford. His scenes take up an extra couple of minutes, and he doesn't even have any toys, so I question why he's here. Especially because these experimental engines, I don't mind too much. Not even Lexi, who's considered the most annoying one. But they don't really do much here, and I would rather more focus be put on them, especially Merlin, who was easily the coolest one. This one's also a musical as well, and besides Hottest Place in Town, I didn't really like any of the other songs in this film. But something I really think this movie does really well is James. He's a lot of fun in this movie, especially funny when he stops Hurricane and Frankie's song just to ask where Thomas is. But yeah, let's get to that ending, which really sucks. So Hurricane's wheels melt in the climax, and Frankie cries because they need workers, and I'm like, what? And everyone just immediately forgives them, as if they didn't do anything really bad in kidnapping Thomas. Great. But yeah, when it comes to Journey Beyond right now, you caught me on a day I like it. This may change in the future, but right now, I think this is a pretty solid movie, and I appreciate what Brenner and his team wanted to say. It just didn't all work that well, but it definitely tries a lot harder, and at least does more interesting things than some of these other films. So I'll say it's a pretty solid, almost good movie. Oh boy, only one left. Oh boy, we're finally here. Big world, big adventures, and I don't like this movie. Thomas goes around the world and teams up with Lightning McQueen to see everything he wants to. Alright, before I complain, I'll go into things I think the movie does fine. I don't mind Nia in this movie. I certainly wouldn't call her amazing, but at least compared to what they do with the TV show version, I think she's okay here. I also like Thomas's arc with Ace. I really like the idea of him needing to realize how bad of an influence he is. And some of the songs are alright, and oh, nope, I think that's all I really like. To get this out of the way, this movie just drags. It is an hour and 20 minutes. This is like almost as long as Magic Railroad, and Wubba has no reason to be this long. Nothing interesting happens. I feel like I'm watching an hour and 20 minutes of a Coco Melon video. And that kind of gets into my next point. This doesn't feel like a Thomas movie. This feels like a generic kids movie with Thomas in it. And yes, it is a kids movie. Thomas is a kids franchise. But at the same time, what I mean is there's nothing really sticking out about this to make this, like, special, you know? This could be a movie about Dora the Explorer going around the world and not much would be different. I also just think Thomas is kind of annoying here. He leaves the island of Sodor just to go around the world, and he doesn't seem at all remorseful about leaving behind his friends even once. He sings this whole song about being sorry to Nia, but like, not to any of his friends he abandoned. Oh, and speaking of the one person who gets to also kind of go around this journey, I feel bad for Topham in every scene he's in. They're not very funny scenes. They're just sad, honestly, because he's trying so hard to find his number one, but oh no, bad thing happens. And the ending is horrible because it's never followed up on. The show kind of went on just assuming Topham didn't go on this adventure anyways. And I know the budget was lower during this time period, but man, the visuals of this film are kind of ugly. The colors are way too saturated, but like the faces and certain backgrounds are just too muted. It's really weird to describe. I don't know what's wrong with the color resolution here. I just don't like it. And just in general, that's the best way to describe this movie. I just don't like it. There's very little about it that appeals to me. It clearly isn't made to appeal to me. It's made to appeal to the lowest common denominator and make Thomas more of a generic kids brand. Too bad it failed because nobody bothered to market this film at Mattel, so it was a failed relaunch that no one even bothered watching. All around, though, this is a pretty sad way to end this Thomas movie marathon I'm doing here. So let's just get to the conclusion. I don't want to spend any more time talking about Wubba. So when it comes to Thomas's film career, it's pretty rocky. Sometimes there was a pretty good film in here, but a lot of these are solid to kind of bad. Though I do think they were a lot of fun and generated a lot of hype for the time that they were new, and they'll always hold a special place in my heart for that. But what you're curious about now is, where does every movie place? Well, let's get into the ranking. Day of the Diesels, Big World, Big Adventures, Misty Island Rescue, Calling All Engines, Thomas and the Magic Railroad, Hero of the Rails, The Great Race, King of the Railway, Journey Beyond Sodor, The Great Discovery, Blue Mountain Mystery, The Adventure Begins, Tale of the Brave, and number 1, Sodor's Legends of the Lost Treasure. Okay, Mark Forrester, now take notes. This is all going to be on the test for your movie whenever Mattel feels like releasing it.